July 2025. The night sky looked as silent and eternal as ever. For most of us, stars are permanent markers, fixed points against the void, offering comfort in their constancy. But sometimes, rarely, something crosses that backdrop. Something that does not belong here. Astronomers tracking faint specks of light noticed such an intruder through Atlas. The designation alone carried weight. It meant that this was only the third time in recorded history that humanity had seen an interstellar object. A body born in another star system, making a brief and fleeting visit to ours. The first had been Oumuamua in 2017, a strange elongated traveler that puzzled scientists with its bizarre acceleration. The second was Borisov in 2019, more comet-like, but still confirmed to have originated beyond our sun. And now 3 Atlas. At first, it seemed to fit the pattern. A distant wanderer, icy, inert, likely destined to drift past us with little more than a momentary headline. But then came the telescope that changed everything. The James Webb Space Telescope, parked in the darkness of the L2 point, had been scanning deep space since its launch. With its 6.5-meter mirror coated in gold, its instruments could see farther and clearer than any observatory before it. Astronomers turned Webb toward Atlas, expecting faint whispers of dust, maybe an icy crust beginning to react to distant sunlight. Instead, they found something else entirely. The very first frames revealed a glow. Not a hazy cloud or a scattered plume, but a concentrated source of light shining at the object's core. The intensity was shocking. The emission was 3 times stronger than any model predicted for something of that size and distance, and stranger still, the glow did not flicker. Comets brighten and fade as they tumble, their jets sputtering unpredictably. Atlas's light was steady, unwavering, almost deliberate. Inside the Webb Operations Center, the reaction was immediate. Data logs were checked, calibration records combed through, every possible source of error hunted down. Could it be a software glitch? A stray cosmic ray? A solar flare contaminating the readout? The answers came back again and again, no. The signature was real. The heat did not come from the surface where sunlight strikes, but from deep inside. As the results circulated, chat rooms filled with uneasy questions. If this was not outgassing, then what was it? One operator described the plot simply, "It looks less like a comet and more like a beacon." The Discovery team began searching archives for any clues. Hubble images from months earlier were pulled up. Test readings from the summer cross-checked, ground-based surveys examined. There were hints of unusual brightness before, but nothing so sharp, nothing so undeniable. The anomaly had been there all along, hiding in the noise, waiting for Webb's infrared eyes to expose it. For comparison, scientists revisited the data from Oumuamua and Borisov. Each had its mysteries, but both ultimately fell into categories the scientific community could at least partially explain. Atlas resisted those categories entirely. It was too bright, too steady, too contained. No tailstream behind it, no erratic surges disrupted its curve. The rules that applied to every comet and asteroid in living memory seemed useless here. At the center of the unfolding puzzle was Dr. Lena Marovich, senior instrument scientist for Webb's spectrograph. She had spent her career ensuring the telescope's readings were true, stripping away error and noise until only reality remained. She knew the instruments better than almost anyone alive, and when the glow first appeared, she was among the first to suspect this was no trivial glitch. Again and again, her team recalculated. Each pass returned the same impossible numbers. A concentrated emission at the nucleus. Brightness 3 times too high. No variance with sunlight angle. Steady, precise, constant. Later, she would describe her realization in stark words. "We knew immediately this was not routine. Something was wrong, or perhaps something extraordinary." Publicly, the finding was softened, entered into bulletins as anomalous infrared emission. But privately, the alarm spread quickly. No comet shines like that at 6 astronomical units from the sun, where sunlight is weak and most icy bodies lie dormant. Yet here it was, glowing alive against the black. Colleagues traded late-night messages, some speculating about unknown geophysical processes, others wondering about radioactivity, still others daring to whisper what no one wanted to put in print. Maybe this was something else entirely. The silence around the discovery grew heavy. Official channels spoke cautiously, while inside observatories the mood shifted from curiosity to unease. The anomaly could not be brushed aside, not this time. The world had seen oddities before, but this was different. This was precise, predictable, controlled. It was as if something at the heart of Atlas was powering itself, holding its glow steady, defying the physics that govern every other wandering stone in the void. The first discovery was only the beginning. In the weeks to come, Webb would detect more patterns too rhythmic to ignore, pulses too deliberate to dismiss. The whispers of something extraordinary would grow louder, transforming speculation into a question that could no longer be avoided. What if this object was not born but built? And in that moment, at the close of July 2025, humanity crossed an invisible line. The familiar night sky was no longer quite so comforting. Something was out there, something glowing in the dark, something that might be coming closer. The first discovery had unsettled the scientific community, but it was what followed that transformed quiet unease into something closer to alarm. Over the following weeks, the James Webb Space Telescope kept its gaze fixed on 3I Atlas. Night after night, its instruments gathered data, splitting faint photons into streams of information, painting a picture of the object's true nature. The more the numbers came in, the less sense they made. The glow at the core did not waver. It remained locked at levels 3 times higher than physics would allow. Comets are messy things. They spin, they vent, they surge with chaotic bursts as sunlight wakes their frozen surfaces. Their light curves flicker and dip, mirroring the unpredictable nature of ice and dust breaking free into the vacuum. But Atlas refused to behave. Its brightness curve was flat, steady, almost mechanical, as if it were holding a constant output by design. Researchers expected to see a tail, the signature of sublimating ice vapor streaming behind the nucleus. Even the most stable comets develop one as they approach the sun. But Hubble's high-resolution images and Webb's infrared snapshots showed no such plume. Instead, the object appeared wrapped in a tight cocoon, a shroud of light hugging close to its body. Analysts argued over the interpretation. Some suggested an exotic type of dust scattering. Others invoked unknown volatiles hidden beneath the crust. Yet as the weeks passed, each hypothesis failed. The cocoon remained too uniform, too self-contained. At observatories in Chile, in Hawaii, and across Europe, optical teams compared notes. By every standard measure, the glow was anomalous. A body this size and distance should have been faint, nearly invisible to all but the most sensitive instruments. Instead, it shone defiantly against the black, too bright for comfort. Its rotation was measured at about 6 hours, long enough to reveal variations if they existed. But the data showed none. The output did not change as the object spun. It was as though something at its heart radiated outward in all directions, ignoring the jagged contours of any surface, indifferent to sunlight, distance, or angle. In private meetings, scientists began using words they would never dare write into official reports. Engineered, artificial, controlled. For many, the leap was too far, too reckless, too easy to dismiss as the lure of science fiction. But the data refused to give ground. Every line of evidence pointed away from natural explanations. What comet glows with clockwork steadiness? What rock refuses to flicker? What frozen body carries a core bright enough to mimic a beacon? Behind closed doors, tension rose. If this was a new type of astrophysical process, it would be a revolution in comet science. If it was not, if something deeper was hiding inside Atlas, then the implications were far greater. Scientists argued late into the night, voices raised over video calls spanning continents. Some clung to the hope of a natural cause, unknown chemistry, exotic isotopes, radiogenic heating. Others felt the weight of something different pressing down on them, a sense that perhaps they were staring at the first undeniable hint of design in the void. Meanwhile, the data kept coming. Each new observation confirmed what had already been seen. No dips, no surges, no telltale bursts. Only a fixed glow, steady as a metronome, radiating from a source no telescope could resolve. To the teams watching from Earth, the conclusion grew harder to escape. Atlas was not following the rules. The familiar categories of asteroid and comet no longer applied. This was something else, something that demanded a new name. And then in early August, the anomaly deepened again. Webb's instruments picked up a subtle but unmistakable rhythm within the heat. Signature itself, a slow swelling and fading every 4 hours, as though the object were breathing. A pulse too regular to ignore. A pattern that hinted not at chaos, but at order. The realization rippled through the research community like a shock wave. What they had thought was only impossible brightness now carried the shadow of intention. For centuries, humanity had scanned the skies for signs that we were not alone. We looked for radio beacons, for alien megastructures, for any trace that intelligence existed beyond our world. And now, in the darkness of our own solar system, an interstellar visitor pulsed with a rhythm no natural rock should have. In the control rooms and observatories, the mood shifted from curiosity to dread. Something alive, or something built, was glowing at the heart of Atlas. And for the first time, the possibility could no longer be pushed aside. By early August, the story of 3 Atlas had already left scientists uneasy. But what came next forced them to confront the unthinkable. As Webb continued to gather infrared data, analysts noticed something hidden within the steady brightness curve. It was subtle at first, a faint swelling in the signal, followed by a slow decline. But as the time series grew longer, the pattern emerged with clarity. Every 4 hours, without fail, the glow from Atlas's core rose and fell, like the beating of a colossal heart suspended in the void. This was no random flicker, no chaotic burst of cometary gas. This was a rhythm. The realization spread like electricity through the research community. Data from multiple nights confirmed the cycle, a gentle rise, a peak, and then a measured fall, before repeating again with uncanny precision. One of the Webb operators, exhausted from a night of rechecking calibration files, whispered aloud what others had only thought silently. "It's alive." Most dismissed the comment as reckless. But the word hung in the air nonetheless, impossible to ignore. Webb was not the only eye on the sky. Around the world, radio observatories tuned their arrays toward the interstellar visitor. In California, the Allen Telescope Array began filtering hours of wideband data. In South Africa, Meerkat joined the effort. In Europe, smaller dishes aligned their antennas with the coordinates streaming out of NASA and ESA. Within days, the findings converged. Among the hiss of background radiation, a faint narrow band pulse appeared. Like Webb's thermal heartbeat, it repeated every 4 hours, unwavering in its rhythm. Fourier analysis confirmed it, a carrier wave cut sharply through the noise, repeating with precision, too perfect for random cosmic interference. And yet the signal was not constant. It drifted subtly, shifting in step with fluctuations in the solar wind, as though it were aware of its environment, adjusting itself against the invisible tides of charged particles streaming from the sun. Independent teams cross-checked their results. Local interference was ruled out. Satellite contamination was eliminated. When 3 observatories across 3 continents confirmed the same pulse, skepticism began to fracture. The possibility emerged, one that scientists had both dreamed of and dreaded for generations. This might not be a natural process at all. It could be deliberate transmission. Conferences that once carried the calm of scientific routine became urgent. Voices raised intense debate. Some insisted the signal must still be natural, perhaps an exotic resonance or a magnetic cycle no one had ever seen before. Others pointed to the precision of the timing, the synchronization with Webb's infrared pulses, the fact that 2 entirely different instruments, one infrared, one radio, had detected the same heartbeat in different forms. Natural processes are messy. They drift, they decay, they waver. This did not. This was exact. As the days passed, the mood grew darker. In labs and control rooms, monitors displayed repeating graphs, their peaks marching across the screen like the pulse of a machine. Scientists who had spent careers parsing random cosmic noise now stared at patterns too precise to dismiss. If this were any other context, one researcher remarked quietly, we would call it communication. Outside official circles, speculation began to leak. Amateur astronomers scoured public archives, catching whispers of the anomaly. Online forums filled with wild theories, some calling Atlas an alien probe, others a dormant ship awakening as it neared our sun. Agencies responded with silence, their public updates carefully stripped of detail, reducing extraordinary findings to bland language anomalous signal. Further study required, but inside the urgency was clear. For the first time, the idea that 3 Atlas might not be a comet at all could no longer be dismissed as fantasy. The heartbeat, both in heat and in radio, demanded an explanation. It was as if the object were not only alive, but reaching out, pulsing deliberately across the void, reminding us of its presence every 4 hours. And then came the flare. One night, as Webb monitored the cycle, the glow surged violently, its intensity rising by nearly 40% in less than an hour. Every telescope trained on Atlas confirmed it. Not just a spike in visible light, but in thermal output as well. It was as if something inside had powered up, shifted gears, awakened. And then, just as suddenly, the numbers stabilized, holding steady at a new, higher baseline. Moments later, orbital predictions no longer matched reality. The path of Atlas, carefully modeled for weeks, had bent. Subtle at first, then undeniable, the trajectory shifted closer to the plane of the solar system. Analysts ran the simulations again and again, searching for a natural cause. None fit. Comets adjust course under the push of outgassing, but the acceleration here was too strong, too clean, too sudden. For the first time, whispers became words. This was not drift. This was maneuver. The heartbeat, the radio pulse, the flare, and now the course change, all linked in the logs, all pointing toward the same conclusion. Atlas was not drifting blindly through our system. It was awake, it was active, and it was moving with purpose. As late August approached, scientists faced a question that no one wanted to ask, but none could avoid. What kind of object beats like a heart, pulses like a signal, and changes course mid-flight? And more terrifying still, why had it chosen now to reveal itself? The flare had shaken even the most skeptical of scientists, but what followed shook them to the core. When orbital analysts updated their models of 3I Atlas, the numbers no longer fit. For weeks, the object's trajectory had been mapped with exquisite precision. Interstellar bodies move fast, but their paths are predictable, governed only by the pull of gravity and the faint nudge of solar radiation. Yet now Atlas had drifted. Not by accident, not within margins of error, but in a way that suggested intent. At the European Space Agency's Control Center, Marco Michelli and his team pored over the data. The flare log by Webb coincided precisely with the change in trajectory. One moment the object burned brighter, its thermal output surging, and the next its path bent slightly toward the plane of the solar system. At first they considered the obvious culprit outgassing. Comets vent jets of gas as sunlight warms their surfaces, producing small but measurable accelerations. But outgassing is messy, uneven, chaotic. The acceleration observed in Atlas was clean, controlled, and far too strong for an object this distant from the sun. The more they ran the numbers, the more it looked like a maneuver. Within hours, discussions spread across international networks. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory ran its own models, and the results matched. The orbit had shifted. The debate sharpened. Could this still be explained by exotic natural causes? Or had something deep inside Atlas deliberately changed its course? For centuries, the heavens had obeyed predictable laws, celestial mechanics that reduced even the most violent comets to equations on a page. But now those equations had failed. Inside closed-door meetings, tension was palpable. Some argued for restraint, warning against leaping to conclusions. Others insisted that the timing was too precise to ignore a flare of energy. Followed by a course adjustment, logged by independent observatories across the globe. It looked like thrust. It looked like guidance. It looked like control. For the first time in history, the possibility was spoken aloud. Not just in whispers, but in official discussions. Atlas might be a vessel. The very idea unsettled governments. If the object had shifted course, where was it going now? New projections showed its path, bringing it closer to the ecliptic, aligning more closely with the orbital plane of the planets. Some predicted it would pass within range of Earth-based observation arrays in the coming months. Others asked darker questions. What if it did not just pass? What if it slowed? What if it turned again? The specter of intent hovered over every conversation. Natural bodies do not choose their paths. They fall, they drift, they are flung by the blind forces of gravity. To speak of a trajectory change was to admit that something had chosen, something had acted. In the conference rooms of space agencies, voices dropped low, sentences trailed off unfinished. No one wanted to say the word, but everyone knew it. Intelligence. Outside official circles, information began to leak. Independent astronomers noticed the discrepancy between public ephemerides and actual sky positions. Blogs speculated, forums filled with theories, some fanciful, some disturbingly close to the truth. Agencies tried to contain the story, issuing vague statements about non-gravitational forces and further study required. But silence only fueled suspicion. Meanwhile, Webb continued its vigil. Each cycle of the strange heartbeat was logged. Each radio pulse marked against the shifting orbit. The alignment was too tight to dismiss. The flare, the maneuver, the heartbeat, they were not separate anomalies. They were pieces of a pattern. Something at the heart of Atlas had stirred, and the universe was watching the ripples spread. For those inside the scientific community, the question had shifted from, what is it, to what does it want? If an object could change its course, mid-flight, then it was no longer a passive traveler. It was a participant, a presence with direction and purpose. And that realization, whispered late at night in observatories across the world, carried a weight heavier than any calculation. In the quiet hours, some scientists confessed their fears. What if Atlas was not the first, but only the first we had noticed? What if others had passed before, dark and silent, unobserved? And if this one was different, if it had chosen to reveal itself, what did that mean for us? Was this chance, or was it contact? The orbit no longer belonged to physics alone. It belonged to intention. And in the dark silence of space, 3 Atlas was no longer just a visitor. It was a presence that had turned its path and perhaps its attention toward us. By late August, the debate had reached a breaking point. The glow, the heartbeat, the maneuver, each alone might have been explained away, forced into the margins of natural science. But together they formed a chain of evidence that resisted every conventional model. And then came the spectroscopic results, the data that would shatter even the most stubborn walls of skepticism. When the raw spectra from Webb were passed to a team at Johns Hopkins, analysts expected to find the usual cometary markers: water vapor, frozen carbon dioxide, perhaps traces of ammonium, or methane chemicals familiar to anyone who had studied the long, icy wanderers of the solar system. At first, those signatures were there, but layered atop them, embedded within the data, were features that no catalog could explain. Some of the absorption lines matched rare earth, elements, exotic metals not typically found in cometary bodies, but instead in the industrial supply chains of Earth. Others hinted at alloys, combinations of metals forged under conditions not known to exist in natural processes. And then there were lines stranger still, faint but undeniable, resonances that seemed to echo theoretical quantum materials, substances proposed in physics papers but never once observed in nature. The findings read less like geology and more like engineering. The reactions were immediate. Analysts double-checked instrument calibration, suspecting contamination or error, but repeated runs yielded the same results. The strange lines held steady. No solar flare, no cosmic ray, no detector glitch could explain their presence. Something in Atlas reflected and absorbed light in a way that screamed of structure, not randomness. To those who read the spectra carefully, the conclusion was unavoidable. This was not raw chemistry. This was design. In meetings that stretched long into the night, scientists confronted the implications. Could nature, in some unknown corner of the universe, produce alloys indistinguishable from those in human laboratories? Perhaps. But when combined with the steady glow, the pulsing rhythm, the course change coincidence began to look like denial. If this were a rock, it is the most remarkable rock in the history of the cosmos, one spectroscopist admitted. If it is not, then we are looking at something built. The word artificial began appearing in private memos. Never in public releases, never in official bulletins, but whispered across encrypted calls, scrawled in margins of drafts, spoken in hushed tones in conference rooms. Artificial. A word that carried with it the weight of contact. The possibility that Atlas was not a passive body at all, but a construct. As the news spread through closed networks, agencies began to tighten their grip on the data. Access to raw telescope feeds grew restricted. NASA and ESA issued new protocols under the guise of planetary security. Some within the scientific community bristled at the secrecy. Others understood the gravity. If this was real, the world was not ready. But word has a way of leaking, even from the tightest vaults. Fragments of the findings slipped into the press, framed in cautious terms, but enough to stoke the fire. Exotic signatures, unexpected alloys, unclassified anomalies. Speculation surged. Was Atlas an alien probe, a derelict craft from a forgotten civilization, or something stranger still, an organism, alive in ways that defied our biology, its body forged of metals instead of flesh? Within the halls of academia, arguments turned fierce. Some demanded absolute caution, reminding colleagues of how little we truly understood about interstellar chemistry. Others pointed to the growing stack of anomalies and asked how much more evidence was needed before they could admit the possibility. For every cautious voice, there was another whispering, what had once been unthinkable, Atlas was engineered. And behind the scientific debates lurked a deeper unease. If the object was artificial, then it was not here by chance. It had crossed the void, carrying with it intent. The alloys, the glow, the steady pulse, they were not the signatures of a comet. They were the signatures of a presence. And that presence, whether machine or something alive, was moving steadily closer to us. The spectroscopic evidence was the tipping point. No longer could the anomalies be dismissed as quirks of nature or mistakes of measurement. Something unnatural, something unexplainable by the laws we knew, lay at the core of Atlas. And in that realization, humanity took one more step toward an answer it had always sought, but never truly believed it would find. We were no longer asking whether we were alone. We were asking what exactly was coming our way. By the final weeks of August, the sense of unease had grown into something closer to urgency. The anomalies had stacked one atop another, an impossible glow, a pulsing heartbeat, a sudden maneuver, and now the signature of alloys that should not exist in nature. Each discovery chipped away at the last defenses of skepticism, and yet the greatest shock was still to come. Inside closed meetings at NASA and ESA, a proposal surfaced. If the object was truly artificial, if it contained something alive or something built, then perhaps it was already listening. Humanity had long debated the wisdom of sending messages into the void, of announcing ourselves to whatever might be out there. For decades, efforts like SETI had focused on listening, waiting, cautious. But now here was something in our own solar system, pulsing as though it wanted to be heard. The debate was fierce. Some argued that transmitting a signal could provoke consequences we could not predict. Others countered that the object was already aware of us, that the steady radio heartbeat was itself a sign of awareness. After long, tense hours, a decision was made. A message would be sent. The content was chosen carefully. No images, no words, nothing that required culture or translation. Instead, the universal language of mathematics and physics. A series of prime numbers. The periodic table. Fundamental constant C, G, H values that any advanced intelligence would know. Simple, stripped down, undeniable. The transmission was scheduled, timed to coincide with one of the object's 4-hour pulses. When the moment arrived, the array beamed humanity's introduction into the darkness. A fragile greeting carried on radio waves across the gulf of space. And then came the wait. Hours passed. Days. Instruments remained fixed on Atlas, scanning every band, filtering noise, searching for anything out of place. For 72 hours, silence stretched. And then, precisely on the third day, at the predicted window, the pulse returned. This time it was different. Distorted, yes. Faint, yes, but unmistakably aligned with the signal that had been sent. Not random. Not background. A reply. The reaction inside the control rooms was electric. Analysts rushed to their consoles, voices rising, data streams flooding across screens. The timing was exact to the second, as if the object had waited, measured, and answered. To the naked eye, the return pulse was simple, a narrow band of energy cut against the static. But within its structure lay modulation, faint patterns that mirrored the rhythm of the transmission humanity had sent. A call and then a response. For many, the moment was overwhelming. Some wept openly, others stared in stunned silence at the monitors. Their careers, their lives, their very understanding of the universe reshaped in a single instant. For the first time, the search was no longer theoretical. The long silence of the cosmos had broken. Something out there had heard us. Something had replied. Almost immediately, the data was locked down. NASA officials rerouted streams to classified channels, and security protocols tightened overnight. Public bulletins continued to speak in vague terms of anomalous signals and ongoing studies, but within the walls of the agencies, the truth was clear. A message had been sent. A message had been received. Humanity was no longer alone in the dialogue. The secrecy only fueled speculation. Rumors spread through the scientific community, whispers of a reply timed to the second, of a pulse that matched our own transmission window. Forums exploded with theories. Was the reply intelligent, or was it some automated process echoing back? Was Atlas a probe, a derelict craft, or a living machine? For every cautious voice, there were dozens more spinning possibilities, each one darker or stranger than the last. Inside the agencies, debate raged. Was this proof of intelligence, or was it some natural resonance triggered by the signal we sent? A cosmic coincidence masquerading as communication. But deep down, few believed in coincidence anymore. The alignment was too exact, the timing too deliberate. The object had listened, and then it had answered. For the first time, the fear became real. If it could hear us, then it could also see us. If it could reply, then it could also choose what to do next. What had begun as curiosity had now turned into a question of security, of survival. And yet, even in the fear, there was wonder. For the first time in history, Humanity had reached out across the darkness and heard a voice echo back. The reply changed everything. The anomalies could still be debated. The alloys could still be questioned. The heartbeat still probed for natural causes. But the return pulse stripped away deniability. Whatever Atlas was, it was not silent. It was not passive. It was aware. And it was speaking. By the end of September, the pieces of the puzzle lay scattered before humanity, impossible to ignore. The discovery had begun with a simple glow, an object too bright for its distance, too steady for any natural comet. That alone had unsettled astronomers. Then came the heartbeat, a pulse every 4 hours, rising and falling with the precision of a machine. The radio signal confirmed it, a carrier wave etched against the noise of the cosmos, unwavering, repeating, answering to no natural process. And then came the flare, the sudden surge of light that coincided with a change in trajectory. A maneuver, a course correction, proof that Atlas was not merely drifting, proof that something inside it was awake. The spectroscopic evidence only deepened the mystery rare earth alloys, impossible combinations, whispers of materials known only in theory. And finally, the reply. Humanity had spoken, and the object had spoken back. For the first time in history, the universe was no longer silent. The dream of contact, long imagined in novels and films, had unfolded not across centuries of waiting, but in the span of a single season. And yet, instead of triumph, the mood was thick with dread. If Atlas was alive, or if it was built, then it had crossed the void for a reason. The question that haunted every scientist, every official, every quiet late-night conversation was the same why. Why here? Why now? Why us? Inside governments and agencies, debates turned darker. Should humanity respond again? Should it stay silent? Some argued for continued communication, seeing an opportunity that would never come again. Others warned that to reply was to expose ourselves, to hand over not just our existence, but our location, our vulnerabilities, our future. Fear began to outweigh curiosity. The data streams, once open, became guarded, classified, hidden from public eyes. What began as science was becoming security. Yet outside, the world already knew enough. Leaks and whispers had fueled a storm of speculation. News outlets filled with theories of alien probes, ancient civilizations, even warnings of invasion. On social media, hope and terror collided. Some celebrated the moment as proof that humanity was not alone, that the long silence had finally been broken. Others braced for the worst, fearing that the reply was not a greeting, but a warning, or worse, a summons. Through it all, Webb continued to watch. Its golden mirror caught every photon, its instruments parsed every pulse. The heartbeat persisted. The radio signal held steady. The course continued to bend, slowly but undeniably, bringing the object closer to the ecliptic, closer to the planets, closer to us. The countdown to its closest approach ticked down with each passing day, and with it grew the weight of anticipation. For scientists, the moment was bittersweet. Decades of searching, centuries of wondering had led here. Proof that we were not alone had come not from distant galaxies, but from an intruder at our doorstep. And yet the answers were few, the questions many. Was Atlas a probe sent long ago, finally reaching its destination? Was it a vessel, alive in some alien way, seeking warmth near our star? Or was it something else entirely beyond our comprehension? As September drew to its close, humanity stood at the edge of a threshold. For the first time, the universe had answered back. For the first time, we were no longer just observers of the cosmos, but participants in a dialogue whose meaning we did not yet understand. And with its closest approach imminent, one truth had settled over everyone who looked to the sky. The next chapter would not be written by speculation, but by encounter. And so the question hung in the air, heavy, unspoken, but inescapable. What is 3I Atlas? A machine? A life form? A message? A warning? The evidence pointed to something built, not born. But built by whom and for what? The reply had come. The silence had ended. And as the object drew nearer, the final question became the only one that mattered. Not if we were alone, not anymore, but whether we were ready for what was coming.